GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Israel finds itself facing what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called not an operation, not a round of fighting, but war. Over 700 Israelis have been murdered by Hamas, including 250 people at a festival in the south of Israel. Women have been paraded through the streets. Hostages have been taken, including an elderly Holocaust survivor, and eyewitness reports have claimed women were raped next to the dead bodies of their friends. None of this is enough for the BBC to call Hamas what they are, terrorists. And Judgment Day for the government's Rwanda deportation plan will soon be upon us. Today, the Supreme Court began 3 days of deliberations on the question of whether Rwanda is a safe third country and if it was right for the Court of Appeal to rule the policy unlawful. With the migrant crisis at the forefront of the national conversation, it is crucial that the court rules in the right way. The architect of Project Fear, the man who set off inflation when he printed billions of pounds as Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has described the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, after her conference speech as a serious economist. But with a record like his, and the fact that he spread inaccurate claims about the size of our economy, the Labour Party is welcome to him. Plus, some troubling news for the evening's denouement. Should you force your pet to go vegan to save the planet? A study last week has suggested that imposing Islingtonian eating habits onto your pets, going vegan or vegetarian, could be a way of reducing greenhouse gases. State of the Nation starts now. This evening, historian and New Culture Forum Senior Fellow Rafe Hadel-Manku and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you and good evening. Well, the main news tonight is that the Israeli Prime Minister has been speaking within the last 15 minutes or so, addressing the nation, saying airstrikes in Gaza are just the beginning. He compared Hamas and the atrocities they've committed as being on par with ISIS. Earlier, Hamas threatened to kill hostages if Israel continued retaliating without warning. More than 800 people have been killed in Israel and 500 in Gaza since the first attack on Saturday. Israel today ordered a complete siege on Gaza, cutting off food, power and fuel to the Palestinian territory. But the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, said the siege was a deeply distressing idea.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. It will only deteriorate exponentially. Medical equipment, food, fuel and other humanitarian supplies are desperately needed, along with access for humanitarian personnel. Relief and entry of essential supplies into Gaza must be facilitated, and the UN will continue efforts to provide aid to respond to these needs.
Well, while support for the Palestinian cause was being shown outside the Labour Party conference in Liverpool today, tonight hundreds of people have gathered at a Jewish community vigil in Westminster in support of Israel. Politicians who spoke at the rally tonight expressed cross-party support for Israel from the UK. Meanwhile, parts of the Israeli embassy appear to have been boarded up amid a pro-Palestine demonstration outside that building. Hundreds gathered this afternoon chanting Israel is a terrorist state and free Palestine. The Foreign Secretary James cleverly responded, saying the UK government will review its support for British nationals in the country.
We reaffirmed our support to Israel in its self-defence against this terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas against unarmed civilians in many instances. This is an ongoing situation, and of course we will be reviewing our support to Israel and of course British nationals in Israel as the situation progresses.
Politics here at home, and the Shadow Chancellor says Labour is ready to rebuild Britain and restore economic security after what she called the chaos of the Tory years. Speaking at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool today, Rachel Reeves said Labour plans to revamp the UK's local town planning departments in order to boost the economy.
Out of the wreckage of Tory misrule, Labour will restore our economic credibility. We will lift our living standards, make work pay, rebuild our public services, invest in homegrown industries in every corner of our country, and together we will get Britain its future back.
Well, also today, the government has been defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court. Sir James Eadie KC, representing the Home Office, told the court the policy is safe and is lawful, despite the East African country being less attractive to migrants than the UK. That's after the Court of Appeal ruled the policy was unsafe, as there was a risk that Rwanda could send migrants back to their country of origin. That's the news. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Nearly 80 years ago, the Nazi extermination camps were liberated by the Allies and Soviet forces across German-occupied Europe. A total of 6 million Jewish people were killed. It is a stain on global history, and nothing has ever or will ever compare to it. And shortly after this great tragedy, the State of Israel was born. But Saturday's terrorist attacks on Israel saw more Jewish people murdered in a single day than has happened since the Holocaust. Hamas has massacred over 700 Israelis. As many as 5,000 rockets were fired into its territory. But perhaps most disturbingly, Hamas terrorists broke into the country and killed countless Israeli citizens in cold blood. A festival filled with young people was ransacked and 250 people were killed. Roughly 100 hostages have been dragged back over the border into Gaza. And tragically, unbelievably, a wheelchair-bound grandmother who was a survivor of the Holocaust has been taken as a hostage. But the context of the Holocaust is crucial to understanding this conflict. The Holocaust was the culmination of hundreds of years of European anti-Semitism, perhaps best embodied by the fabricated text known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an early 20th century work published in Imperial Russia, which characterized the Jewish people as the drivers of a global conspiracy. It was written amidst the backdrop of the Russian pogroms and was eventually taught as fact in Nazi Germany. While Hamas, founding charter in 1988, endorses the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So this is what Israel is facing. Not resistance or rebels or militants, but Nazi-inspired Islamist terrorists, whose main aim is to wipe the Jewish people off the face of the earth. And yet, in spite of these facts and in spite of these recent events, the BBC continues to refer to Hamas as militants. This is shameful, and it seems to suggest that kidnapping elderly Holocaust survivors or murdering young people at a festival in cold blood is some sort of legitimate military tactic. It is not. But it's also important to remember this conflict extends far beyond the borders of Israel. Hamas is an Iranian puppet whose strings are being pulled to obstruct a US-brokered peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But the major fissure of the Middle East remains the Saudi-Iranian conflict. Hence, the Iranians encourage Hamas to launch the act of terror to scupper the Saudi peace deal. It is essential to remember the importance of Iran behind this conflict. Iran hates the West as much as it hates Israel. And unfortunately, we have been funding our enemy, as last month the Biden administration handed $6 billion to the Iranians in a prisoner swap deal. We have allowed ourselves to appear to be weak since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and softness to Iran has encouraged the Russia-Iranian axis. Now we must show strength. Israel is a fundamental, important ally of Britain and indeed of the broader Western world. We owe it to this ally to help it to restrain Iran's aggression. Israel is the beacon of freedom in a democratic desert, and it currently faces an existential crisis, and now more than ever, it needs our support. I also want to hear from you. As always, please send me your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm very grateful to be joined not only by the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, as well as Eyal Biram, the reserve captain in the IDF Special Forces. Eyal, you told me just before we went on air that 5 of your friends have been killed. And I think that's so tragic, but so important, because when talking about terrible events like this, sometimes the numbers become depersonalizing. But when you've had such a real personal experience, it must be so hard to bear and difficult to come on television to talk about.
Yeah, I'm here today to try to give the sense and feeling, because the numbers is one thing, and we can look at the numbers and imagine a war far away. But I see the faces of my friends on TV, and that's the way I recognize 5 of my friends. And I hope that I will not see more, but there is 250 people that have been murdered in this festival, and I have many friends that are still there, or they are right now kidnapped by Hamas. I don't know. That's the truth. And I'm here to try to give this sense of understanding for what's happened there, that this is, as you mentioned, this is not militants. This is a terror attack, and more than that, this is a pogrom, like what's happened in Auschwitz, unfortunately.
Jake, how should the state of Israel respond? Because it's a very strong military, it's a very powerful force. This has been an extraordinarily provocative attack and continues to be, with hostages being murdered. What is the right balance for the Netanyahu government to get in responding?
Well, I think to get a sense of the scale of what's gone on, Israel is a very small population by comparison to that of the UK. It's even smaller than the population of London. So proportionately, it will be the equivalent of about 7,500 Britons being killed by terrorists. That's how it feels in Israel at the moment. This is a national trauma. And the real threat, of course, is not just Hamas, but it's Hezbollah off the northern border in Lebanon, which has up to 150,000 missiles pointing at Israel. That's more than the arsenal of most nation states, as you mentioned in your introduction, funded and controlled to a large extent, even founded, actually, by the Iranians. And so from Israel's point of view, the thing to avoid is wider regional conflagration. And in the Middle East, the main language that is spoken and understood is that of power, unfortunately, as we've seen. And so for Israel to sit back and listen to the Western liberal voices of kumbaya and open the borders and all be friends, that will lead to just more massacres and will encourage attacks from the north. So Israel does have to respond. Indeed, Britain would respond, and we did respond when we were under existential threat during World War II. It's got to be hard, it's got to be tough, but it's got to be within the rules of warfare.
And a strong defensive strategy, closed borders and so on, has been very successful until now. So how does it get back to that situation, and what should it do about Iran?
Well, these are huge questions. I mean, the fact that Gaza has been sealed off is something that is criticised a lot, particularly by the left in Britain and across the West. They call it an open-air concentration camp because they sealed the borders. Well, imagine if the borders weren't sealed. In fact, we don't have to imagine. We've seen what has happened, what would have happened in recent years. Now, what Israel does with Iran is another question. You're right to point out that the Biden administration has released $6 billion as part of this prisoner swap. That's not the only pot of money that it's released. There's $10 billion that have been released from escrow account in Iraq. And there's a further pot of $3 billion in Japan that's under question and elsewhere. As well as America turning a blind eye to oil sanctions at the moment, not enforcing them. As a result, Iran is able to produce 2 million barrels of oil a day and sell many of them to China. So we have been engaging, particularly the American administration, engaging in a policy of, I'm afraid to say, appeasement, which they call de-escalation, and we see the results. So what will need to be done is a tough response has got to be adopted towards Iran. Nobody wants to see a nuclear weapon arising in Iran, and in order to prevent that, a military strike may be necessary if we don't get tough now.
Well, what would you like to see the British government do to help Israel in this hour of need? What can we do that is practical and effective help? Because it's very easy to talk, but something more than talk needs to be done in these circumstances.
What I hope to have to see, and I've been training and working with British officers during my military service, is that the British Army will send an army, not to fight at the beginning, but just to show their existence in Israel, to show that we are not alone, similar to what the US did. I think this is a necessary move, and this is a way to show, as you mentioned, both of you, this is not a war between Israel and Hamas. And this is not a war between Israel and Gaza, which is a very small geographical area. This is a larger war that started a few years ago in Ukraine and will continue right now in the Middle East. And in order to stop it, that's the only way to prevent it.
And that's very important, isn't it, that the Russian-Iranian axis is key to this. Russia and Iran are very close and tied in, obviously, with North Korea as well, and that they want to destabilise the area. They want to upset the prospects of a Saudi peace deal with Israel. And we need to be clear that it's not just a narrow, localised issue. It is part of a global problem.
Absolutely. It would not happen without it. And I just want to mention another point. We do need to make a debrief and understand what's happened in Israel and why the intelligence did not know about it. But more than that, what changed from the last every conflict that had been before that, the last wars and operations in Gaza, is that right now this is not a war between Hamas and Israel. This is a war between Iran that decided to attack the West. And they're the one that funded it, they're the one that planned it, and they're the one that sent the ammunition. The same ammunition that been attacked the Ukrainian forces, the British forces, and the American forces right now in Ukraine.
Jake, are we really saying that it's actually Donald Trump who got Iran right when he pulled out of the deal with Iran? He recognised it for the dangerous state that it was, and this attempt to cozy up to Iran is behind all of this problem because it's provided the money and the resources for this attack to be launched?
I think there's a lot to be said for Donald Trump's maximum pressure policy, whereby he sought to squeeze Iran rather than indulge it. And, I mean, on the one hand, it's true that after pulling out of the nuclear deal without a real solid plan, the Iranians made a lot of progress towards a weapon. That's true. At the same time, the Iranian coffers were drained. It was unable to fund militant groups overseas and terrorist groups overseas in the same way and to the same extent it had been doing before. So maximum pressure has a place, and it should have a place in American foreign policy, rather than when the Iranians took, 4 American hostages, rather than paying them $1.2 billion a head, engage in maximum pressure, go after the people by overt and covert means who have taken those hostages and place them under enough pressure that they won't do it again, on the understanding that they will never pay a penny to them. That's the only way forward. And I would just add to what Eyal has been saying, and yourself, that this is a regional struggle, not just actually between Israel as a representative of the democratic free world and the forces of Islamism, but also it's part of a greater cultural war that takes place in the West and indeed here in Britain. It's been astonishing to me and sickening to me and to many in the Jewish community and right-thinking people all over Britain to see that many people, their first response to seeing this terrorist barbarism, this medieval pogroms, as you said, against Jews, the like of which we haven't seen for a long time, but evokes memories going back centuries, even millennia. The response that for most people has been to take up a Palestinian flag and go into the streets in support of these murders. Now, supporting the Palestinians is not an illegitimate cause, it's a respectable cause. But supporting Hamas in this way now
is completely shameful. It's most disgusting behaviour. Thank you to Jake and Eyal. I'm joined now live from Israel by Uri Dromi, founder of the Jerusalem Press Club. Uri, it must be a very difficult, nervous time at the moment.
It is indeed. The morning started for me by driving my 21-year-old granddaughter to her military base because she was called back on the reserve. She's a paramedic, and I asked her, what are you going to do? And she said she already knows they're going to take the wounded from the field hospital into the real hospitals according to the wounds. And then I came back here, and immediately there was a barrage of rockets on our city, so I had to go to the shelter. And if this is not enough, then just an hour ago, the neighbor from the floor above us just told us that his brother was killed in this house. So it's all really, every Israeli is now surrounded or involved in the unfolding events. But as much as this is a tragic event, the Israeli society now is showing its strength, and people are coming together, and divides are pushed aside, and we are there. There's a consensus. We were attacked, and we're going to fight back and bring the war to the home of Hamas, and we're going to persevere.
And what is the political effect of this? Because obviously Israeli politics has been very complex in recent years. Is it having any effect? People uniting behind the government, or are they criticising it for not being able to stop this?
Well, the initial inclination of people is really to put politics aside, said we are in a war and we should all be together. But you can't brush aside the fundamental differences between Israelis, starting from the beginning of the year, about the judicial reform. Some of us call it a constitutional coup. And all the rallies and the protests against it. The call now coming from the public is for a national unity government. And it's a pity that it took so much time to realize that we are in a state of war, and old politics of 3 days ago should be pushed aside. But eventually, I believe that tomorrow we'll have a war cabinet of some experienced people, and this is what we need at the right time. But I must tell you, the questions are there, question of the intelligence blunder, the questions about what led us to this, and time for reckoning will come, but not now.
OK, well, thank you very much. All right-thinking people in the United Kingdom are supporting you and wish you well. So thank you, Yuri and Jake and Eyal, for joining me. I obviously want to hear from you. Let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. Later, we're going to be speaking about Rwanda and the Supreme Court, so we'll be back to domestic news.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Steve says, shocking scenes coming out of Israel. How can their intelligence service have missed this? Well, I think the fair point to make on that is that the terrorists may be thwarted 99 times, but if they get through once, it's a disaster, and that's the problem for security services. Helen says, I've complained bitterly via the BBC complaints procedure about their disgraceful coverage of this terrorist attack. Time for the government to seriously consider the mandatory licence fee. Well, I agree with that. Today marks the start of a 3-day hearing at the Supreme Court, where they've got back from their holidays, which is nice of them, where the government will challenge a Court of Appeal ruling that the sending of asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. The plan, which had already been agreed with the Rwandan government, would see asylum seekers deported to the safe East African nation instead of claiming asylum here. This is in a bid to deter people from making the perilous journey across the Channel. It's been reported that around 376 asylum seekers have died attempting to cross the Channel, and just 2 months ago, 6 asylum seekers tragically died after their boat sank. A week ago, another 500 migrants arrived via the small boats, many with up to 28 people packed into them. Not only will this plan save lives, but if the appeal is successful, the economic assessment of the plan will save the British taxpayer billions. Organised criminals are profiteering by tens of thousands of pounds at the demise of vulnerable people. Every moment that the plane is sat on the runway, we're making it easier for migrant mafia to prosper. Well, I'm now joined by a very distinguished panel of historian and New Cultural Forum senior fellow Rafe Heddle-Mankoo and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Amy,
Jacob,
isn't it time the judges just accepted what Parliament had said and allowed us to get on with this really sensible plan?
Now, you know I don't think it's a sensible plan. I completely agree with Keir Starmer that this should not ever go through, even if it is deemed by some hook or crook to be lawful. It's immoral, it's over-expensive, it's impractical. It would cost £160,000 per person to go to a place with a completely abhorrent human rights record. And also, we have seen what happens when refugees get sent to Rwanda. Israel, it was a voluntary scheme, but a scheme nonetheless. Refugees went to Rwanda, protested over food rations, showing that their care wasn't there. And what happened to them? The Rwandan authorities shot 12 of them dead. This is not a scheme that has any decency or morality.
We've got very clear agreements about the housing of the migrants and indeed of the feeding of the migrants and the treatment by the Rwandans. But the point of the cost is that we're spending £8 million a day on housing migrants. And if we have a proper deterrent, people will stop coming.
It's not going to be a deterrent, though, is it? There cannot be a deterrent.
Of course it's a deterrent, because people don't want to go to Rwanda, they want to come to the UK.
The push factors are so strong, but how can it be, on one hand, Suella's dream, and on the other hand, a deterrent? It can't be both those things.
Yes, of course it can be, because people don't want to be in France, they want to come to England. Now, France is quite a nice place in many ways, so any country other than England seems to be a deterrent.
Do you not think the dinghy alone is enough of a deterrent? Can you imagine putting your child in a boat with a motor that's completely unreliable, and you've seen people go before you, and
they're mainly not children. 85% of them are single men.
16% of them are children.
Well, they're not children. They're women as well as being men. But they are mainly young men who are coming over. They're economic migrants.
Do you know what? Sometimes the phrase economic migrants, it frustrates me, because that also underplays the push of poverty. Poverty can be just as awful a scenario for you to leave your country, and in a push in itself, you have absolutely nothing.
So should we take all 780 million in the world who might qualify?
Of course we would.
Good. OK, so we've got to stop it somewhere.
We should take our fair share.
Rafe.
So, look, £8 million a day works out to around £3 billion a year. Now, the government is actually quite hopeful that the Supreme Court will rule in their favour. We know that Lord Reed, who's president of the Supreme Court, he has previously expressed his dismay at the overreach of the European Court of Human Rights and human rights legislation. His deputy, Lord Hodge, similarly inclined. So there's very good reasons to believe that the government will have its way in proving to the courts that it's in the best interest of Rwanda to actually live by the code of this agreement. It's in its reputational interest globally, it's in its financial interest to do so. And of course, it has no return agreements with any other countries for the first thing. Secondly, there'll be a British permanent observer there to make sure everything is done by the book. And separately to that, there will be an independent monitoring system to make sure that everything is done the way that it should be.
And Rwanda has...
They have never done things the way that they should. And also, we would have to take 200...
When they are receiving that much money, and when their international reputation is based upon it, and when you have countries like Denmark, for example, also looking to Rwanda for a similar scheme, it's absolutely in their best interest to do that. A deterrent is absolutely necessary in order to ensure that boats stop coming across the channel. It's one of many measures. The problem here, though, is that even if we succeed here, if the government succeeds on this, there is still every chance that, well, we won't know until November. The first flights may go off in February, but even then, if a flight does try to leave, there's still every chance that the ECHR may still impose an interim measure to try to stop that flight.
But we've legislated to overrule
that's
that.
when we may have the first use of this the Illegal Migration Act trump card, where the government can disallow that. But even that may be subject to its own court challenges, which actually means that we will get ever closer to the next general election without anyone having been transferred. And the government desperately wants to get thousands of migrants to Rwanda before that election. Now, you and I will disagree about this, but
thousands anyway. It was 200 people.
No, at the outset, but the actual long-term plan is for thousands.
Does it concern you that you're placing the fate of incredibly vulnerable people in the processing of the Rwandan government? I think a lot of people make a mistake and they think that we do the processing in Rwanda. That's not the case.
The fit young men who are coming here across the channel are not vulnerable people. The vulnerable people are their wives and children that they have left alone in those allegedly terrible conditions that we have. Now, I think that the solution to all of this, now you and I will disagree, is the Ascension Islands, and I understand you think it's
completely bonkers idea.
And bonkers, but it actually isn't bonkers at all. If you think about it, Nauru, which was what the Australians used, was 3,000 miles away from Australia. That's only 1,000 miles more to go to the Ascension Islands. It's perfectly viable. I mean, the government was considering
It's not the distance, it's that there's nothing there other than a military base which doesn't have a fence around it because there hasn't needed to be one. So you would have to take builders out there. It's just phenomenally expensive.
No, it's not. It's not £1 million per person, as you've quoted before, because of course you're building infrastructure for a short-term period, because the deterrent effect will come into play within a series of months. And we're not talking about we're not talking about living luxurious lifestyles. The very basic necessities are required.
You have to build buildings for the builders before you can build anything for anybody to live there.
But it's not going to cost £1 million per person.
Well, that was the forecast.
Do you not think it's a little more practical to stop this Australian Poor Tribute Act and do something like process the asylum claims, find out who the people are and let them work and contribute? No one wants to stay in a hotel for £9 a week. It's a horrible fate for anyone in that situation.
But people want to get here. And they will carry on coming here illegally, 50,000 a year, unless we have some deterrent or remove them effectively.
The greatest scandal is the fact that we have 74% of asylum applications approved by this government. That needs to be
Which is higher than other comparable countries. Anyway, thank you to my panel. After the break, it's been the Labour Party conference this week, but have the Reds shown their mettle? Plus, should you force your canine friends to become herbivores?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg and this remains State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Diane, can't believe this legal dilemma has been going on for 18 months now. We just need a decision. And Edward, we need to stop the small boats. End of. If Rwanda's the way to do it, that's what needs to be done. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves gave her Labour Party conference speech today, and she promised to grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out in all sorts of places, with Labour fighting the next general election on the economy. As a former Minister for Government Efficiency, I'm delighted to note that she's even following in my footsteps with some fairly sensible points about cutting waste and improving efficiency. Perhaps she should come on State of the Nation. Unfortunately, she was then endorsed by the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, a man who must bear the bulk of responsibility for the current inflation because of his monetary policy failures, as well as his extraordinary politicisation of the previously independent Bank of England. Through his extreme Europhilia and green zealotry, he turned the Bank of England into a sort of Islington soiree. An endorsement from the acme of socialist failure is hardly desirable, but is it a warning of what is to come? Well, still with me is my panel, historian and New Culture Forum Senior Fellow, Rafe Hadel-Mancu, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole Turner. Rafe, would you rather be endorsed by Mark Carney or Beelzebub?
Well, I have to say, I did find it... Well, I would just say that I find it highly entertaining to see socialists applauding a former Goldman Sachs banker. He's clearly demeaned the office of governor and the office of the bank and the institution of the Bank of England by taking such a partisan stance. But as you said, he's already demeaned his office through his reckless inflationary policies. I mean, he's very keen to place the blame for it at the door of Brexit rather than at the door of the old lady of Threadneedle Street. But, you know, his endorsement aside, you know, I mean, we always know that a Labour government always leaves office with higher unemployment rates. If you look at the FTSE All-Share Index, it always does better under Tories than under Labour. But the reality is I think we can take Rachel Reeves more seriously than many of her predecessors, particularly her immediate shadow chancellors. And, you know, she has parked her tanks on Tory turf and wants to have a battle of the curse with another sort of policies, and those are the policies of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. I could very easily have seen Liz Truss delivering a great tract of this current speech, you know, reforming the planning system, building for growth,
Not
investment,
the bit about the OBR,
investment in infrastructure. I mean, there's very little difference between the two parties on those levels. Of course, the thing that Liz Truss and Rachel Reeves will both seem to be unaware of is the fact that money is no longer cheap. The cost of borrowing is very expensive today. We may be going towards another financial crisis with countries slashing spending. UK gilts, 30-year gilts, are at a 20-year high of 5%. That can't be done. The tax raises she wants to do will only generate about £5 billion from non-don status and also from school fee VATs, as opposed to £1,000 billion a year spending. So quite where this money will come from is for others to say.
And that's the point, isn't it, Amy, that Carney is the inventor of the magic money tree. He printed hundreds of billions of pounds, and then we get the inflation that flows from excessive money creation. Labour loves all of that. But that source of money's dried up.
I just think you and Mark Carney need to go for dinner and sort this out, because you need to find some common ground. You need to take responsibility that Brexit did have an impact. He can take a bit of responsibility for his role in inflation, and you can come to a middle ground.
Let's stick to the Labour Party conference.
Right, you're the man that called Mark Carney an enemy of Brexit.
Yeah, he is.
Failed second-tier politician.
Well, he is.
Rude words about an established career of public service.
No, he wanted to be Prime Minister of Canada, and he failed at that, so he came and interfered in our politics. It's quite simple.
And a wailing banshee, which made me think, I wonder how you talk about me when I'm not here.
I say very nice things about you, because it's not your job to be independent. If it were, you wouldn't do it particularly well, and I wouldn't manage independence very well either.
Mark Carney's record, he has been quite good at getting things right.
Has he? What?
Yes, he helped us out in the global financial crash.
No, he didn't.
Well, he was King
He was appointed by George Osborne, snapped up by George Osborne, and then endorsed by Boris Johnson, so he's hardly a socialist.
It was the previous governor of the bank, Mervyn King, who got the financial crisis right, worked out the scheme to save the banks. What Carney got hopelessly wrong is that he carried on a policy of exceptionally loose money for years and years as the economy was growing, constantly saying he was going to tighten policy and failing to do it, which set the groundwork for inflation. But let's come back to Rachel Reeves rather than the fact that the inventor of the magic money tree has backed her. I mean, Rafe makes a very interesting point, and it's similar to what Blair tried, isn't it? That if you just pretend you're Tory on your economic policy, you can shut down the argument that you will be wildly extravagant and you'll squeeze the rich until the pips squeak, and then you hope you can sneak in all your left-wing views round the corner.
I think today Rachel Reeves gave us our money back, made us feel like our money will be worth something, clamping down on waste, clamping down on COVID fraud, working ordinary people were the focus. And the main thing I took was the theme of security. But I'm
delighted the first two things you mentioned were things I was doing whilst I was in government. So I set up the Public Sector Fraud Authority to clamp down on COVID fraud and was detailing ways to reduce government waste by cutting the civil service, which you weren't that keen on.
Wasn't keen? What do you mean?
On 91,000 cut in the civil service.
Oh, no, that's a whole different subject.
Well, that's the cutting government waste.
Let's not vilify anyone.
That's the cutting of government waste.
We'll leave that to...
all we're getting
Jacob,
from Rachel Reeves is the clichés who want to cut waste.
But things like painting a plane for 140 million, things like the Rwanda scheme, that PPE contracts,
I'm not sure it was 140 million to paint a plane.
VIP lanes. That is wasting public money, not our public services, not our public servants.
There was one good part to this, and this was the idea of securonomics, economic security being very important. We need to do more, we need to make more, we need to sell more at home. You know, China's long-term strategy is to become entirely economically self-reliant and independent, whilst the rest of the world becomes ever more dependent upon globalisation. And I thought that was an interesting rejection of Tony Blair's New Labour globalisation, which you could say got us into this mess.
But actually, in this area, Tony Blair's right. This is straight mercantilism coming from Rachel Reeves, and mercantilism always makes countries poorer. Importing makes you more prosperous because you buy a wider range of goods at a cheaper price.
Well, it depends what you're importing. If you're going to be importing microchips from Taiwan, then I think you're going to have to perhaps think about other sources of that, and that's the great problem.
Well, no, surely we've got a duty to keep Taiwan safe rather than not import from Taiwan.
Well, we did a very good job with Ukraine, didn't we? I mean, the point is, there's not much one can do against the Chinese behemoth. The point is, when it comes to critical parts of the economy, we need to ensure that we are much more self-reliant, much more independent, and that we aren't going to...
we produce, that we make stuff. That's the key.
We're a bigger manufacturing country than France. People always forget this.
We could do a lot more manufacturing here at home.
We're still, what, the 8th biggest manufacturing country in the world? We're not doing too badly.
We're not doing too badly, but there's clearly room for...
Don't talk Britain down. That's the problem. Anyway, thank you very much. That was a cheap shot. Thank you to my brilliant panel. Coming up, has the time come for our four-legged companions? Daisy, I hope you're listening, to follow the vegan way of life.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Georgia, I quite like Reeves's speech. Wouldn't it be good to have a female Chancellor of the Exchequer at last? I'd rather have a Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, but never mind. Barry, I thought the Bank of England was meant to sit independently from government and politics. I know Mark Carney is a former governor, but I think his endorsement of Reeves does call that into question. Well, he wasn't un-party political or un-party pre. As governor, he had a great obsession against Brexit and made it clear for all to see. Anyway, now we've had to enjoy the incessant cries from climate warriors over the past few years that subjecting ourselves to a vegan diet, the fast way to ingestion of our tofu, lentils and avocados, is one of the best ways to save the planet. But it's now emerged that we must be trying harder and indeed should be forcing our four-legged friends to partake in this ghastly diet. A study from a university in Australia has found the production of meat-based dog food, what else would it be, generates more greenhouse gases than the UK's total output. Shows how little difference it makes for us doing anything. The research suggests that putting our canine companions onto a vegan diet would therefore help to cut greenhouse gas emissions. This comes as the animal charity PETA has launched a new billboard campaign about eating lobsters, which asks the obvious question. If you wouldn't eat your dog, why eat a lobster? To which the answer is also obvious. A lobster is no fun to take for a walk. Have we really got to get into the trenches of veganism so deeply that we are photoshopping the heads of dogs onto the body of a lobster? Anyway, joining me now to discuss this latest campaign is Margarita Sashkova, PETA's Senior Digital Marketing Manager. Margarita, did you design this brilliant picture of a lobster looking like a dog, or a dog looking like a lobster?
Well, it wasn't me, but it was like work of my team, of my colleagues, and they did an amazing job. And I would say that we really need to make people thinking of why we would be eating lobsters when we are not eating our dogs. And lobsters are intelligent animals. They are capable of feeling fear. They're capable of feeling pain. And if you wouldn't dream of putting your dog in a pot of boiling hot water just to kill and eat them, why would you do the same to a lobster? It's equally cruel, as they feel it all. For them, these 2-3 minutes are agonizing. For them, they don't want to be there. They don't want to end up on our plate.
But lobsters are very different from dogs. But do you want dogs to have vegan diets as well? You were saying you've got a dog. Do you put your dog on a vegan diet?
Well, first about lobsters, they are not really different from dogs, cats or humans in their capacity to feel pain. And actually scientists from the European Union put them in the category 1, which means that there are no scientific doubt at all that they are capable of feeling pain, and dogs and humans are in the same category. And speaking about dogs and their diets, nowadays people are more and more aware of the cruelty to animals on factory farms. And everyone is aware that vegan diet is the best way to cut someone's carbon footprint.
But dogs are naturally carnivorous, so isn't it a cruelty to the dog to put the dog on a vegan diet?
Well, actually, just like humans, dogs are omnivores. So given that the diet is balanced and complete, and I really want to stress it, the welfare of dog is absolutely important. So you need to be checking on how your dog feels. But it's possible.
But can it be balanced without meat for a dog?
Yes, it can be. And there are so many examples of dogs thriving on, complete and balanced vegan diets. And more producers of dog food are coming up with amazing combinations that have all the nutrients that the dog needs.
But is this right? Haven't people even been finding that humans who have no meat in their diet are finding that they are lacking essential nutrients that they need for healthy lives? And that we discovered there's a genetic predisposition, we were discussing this last week, in humans to want to eat meat. Dogs surely even more so, because by and large their diet tends to be more meat-driven than plant-driven.
Well, there are so many humans on meat-based diet that are also malnourished, and dogs too. So the key thing here is really to get all your nutrients. And we have so many examples of dogs and humans who can do it. And one example that comes to my mind, do you watch Formula One? Do you know Lewis Hamilton?
I know who he is.
He's vegan himself. He's 7 times world champion. He in the best physical shape to, be in the top of his sport. And his dog Roscoe is also having plant-based foods, plant-based meals, and his dog is very happy and healthy, and he is a tremendous advocate for animals.
But what are you going to do with all the farm animals if people aren't having meat? That there are millions of cows, millions of sheep that are only have the life that they have because they are turned into meat, that there is no life for them without the meat industry. They don't exist at all. Is that better or worse for an animal?
Well, of course, change doesn't happen overnight, and I doubt that one day we will wake up and everyone will go vegan and all the animals will disappear. But also, would you really want to have a life that a cow has on a dairy farm, for example, being forcibly impregnating, having their babies stolen from her, being killed after her milk production reduces? It's not the life someone would want.
But this is the problem with the argument, that it's the anthropomorphization of animals. Animals are different from humans. They're not there thinking, I'm being impregnated by artificial insemination. That's not a concern of theirs. They don't have rational thought processes in the same way that humans do. They don't have that higher level capability of thought. They have a life, they have grass to chew, they get cow cake fed to them, they get milked. That is a very contented life for a cow on a farm in Somerset.
Well, cows are sentient beings, and cows
they're
are
sentient,
known
but
to
they're not
cry
intelligent.
for days. They're known to cry for days when they're separated from their loved ones, when they're separated from the babies. Cows are known to be able to recognize up to 100 different faces of other cows. Cows have very complex social issues, so it's about speciesism. It's us thinking that we are higher than other animals.
We are higher than other animals.
We can live with other animals in peace. It's not us versus them. We can have a great life, and we don't have to eat
them. But the cows can have happy lives, providing us with milk and ultimately with meat, can't they?
I don't think they're providing us with milk. We are stealing their milk. And when they don't produce enough of it, they're killed. We are killing them. So essentially, it's not a happy life. What human would want to live a life like that?
Cows aren't humans. That's the key point. But thank you, Margarita. That's all from me. Up next, it's Mark Dolan. Mark, what is on your bill of fare this evening? Vegan, vegetarian or carnivorous?
Listen, let me tell you, always carnivorous. What a lead-in you've given me, Jacob. And my reaction to the Shadow Chancellor's speech today: can Britain afford a Labour government? Are unisex toilets an insult to women? And Keir Starmer will axe the Rwanda plan, even if it's working. Do we face 5 years of effective open borders? We're live at 9.
Well, that sounds extremely interesting. It's fascinating how the word unisex has come to mean both sexes rather than one sex, when obviously it means one, but that started with barbershops. Anyway, great stuff coming from Mark. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the cows are going to have glorious sunshine in Somerset tomorrow, and the grass will be going beautifully.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst, and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We'll see some patchy low cloud and fog developing, particularly across southern parts of England and Wales, but further heavy rain pushing into Scotland. That's courtesy of weather fronts pushing through over the next few days. This weather front, a dividing line between warm air to the south and colder air trying to come into the north by the middle of the week. We've already got that cloud and rain spilling into parts of Northern Ireland, pushing into western Scotland as we move through this evening into the early hours. Elsewhere, turning quite grey. There'll be some mist and low cloud developing by the end of the night, particularly across southwestern parts of the UK. And fairly mild temperatures for all staying up in double figures. So it's a wet start across Scotland to start Tuesday morning. Outbreaks of heavy rain, which will continue to push slowly southeastwards through the day here. So we could see some further flooding issues. Brightening up across across parts of England and Wales. Some low cloud, though, lingering across southern counties. Plenty of hazy sunshine here, lifting temperatures to around 23 or 24. Turning increasingly windy across the northern half of the UK as weather fronts push in. Those weather fronts slowly push their way southwards into Wednesday, turning heavy at times, particularly across parts of Wales. Further north, brighter sunny spells and scattered showers, particularly across northwest Scotland. Some of these heavy at times, quite muggy across southern parts of the UK under that cloud and rain. A bit fresher further north and turning cooler as we head towards the weekend.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.